Oh, great. I've had the privilege of worshipping Goddess Lakshmi through Goddess Saraswati, as uh, Professor Mashelkar always, Dr. Mashelkar always said. One needs to think through how you can uh, sort of bridge that gap, right? So the journey has been quite a mixed one. I think there was a pretty hardcore academic for almost 2 decades, and then launched into entrepreneurship. I think there was a bit of an overlap. I think in the computer science automation group at ISC, for the first 5 years or so, we were both faculty, full-time faculty, and entrepreneurs, and then we finally took a choice to go full-time with the entrepreneurship. And subsequently, I returned to ISC. So I've sort of done this back and forth, and I'll just take you through the journey now, and I'll try to finish in about 30 minutes, and then have a little time for interaction. I think. Uh, I said, the title was Fulfilling a Promise. So I just wanted to point out what some of these promises are. I think personally, I grew up in a family of freedom fighters, and my uncle and grandfather were authors of the Constitution. My dad was also a freedom fighter. He was a student leader in those days and had gone to prison. So the idea of going to America and not coming back didn't arise. I mean, I basically knew that I would come back, although I stayed a little bit longer than I thought I would. I think the other personal sort of journey was that when I got to MIT, my host family were Daisy and Gilbert Oakley, and Gil had been the uh, person at Ford Foundation who'd been sent to India to build IIT Kanpur and BITS Pilani. So I had studied at BITS, and so Gil, accepted me as a host student when I went to MIT, and so they were my family there. And Gil, unfortunately, had cancer, so I was at his bedside when uh, his health was failing, and Gil made me promise that I would come back to India. And there was this personal promises to keep. I also want to mention the institutional promise. I think ISC had really, I mean, lots of people give most of the credit for ISC to J.N. Tata and Swami Vivekananda and so on. But I think the Mysore Maharaja, King Rajendra IV, Vadiyar, also did his bit. I think he gave the land, he gave his mother, the Queen Regent, gave her jewelry to complete the ISC tower construction, and many of the actual costs were borne by the royal family. And I think he beseeched the scientific community to increase the material wealth of the country and the state. And I think that I think is a promise, institutional promise that again I think enters into the picture as I talk. I think uh, as was mentioned, when I went to the US, the hot topic those days was decision sciences, and I mean, like, uh, there was no computer science. We were all electrical engineers who then, I think at Purdue, maybe the first computer science program had started in 1973, but at MIT, it was basically WECS, and I basically went into the operations research program, and And the hot topic then was, of course, linear programming. And in fact, most of the CPU cycles in large mainframe computers were being used to solve large linear programming problems. And so it was the hot topic. So I decided to work essentially in mathematical optimization. And and what was really interesting was that underlying optimization were really these principles of variable elimination, right? So whether you looked at Gaussian elimination, which is of course to solve systems of linear equations, you had Fourier elimination, which was, as is illustrated in the top box there, uh, how do you eliminate variables in inequalities by looking at pairwise combinations of sign changes and then taking positive multiples to cancel and zero out those coefficients. So it's essentially a question, a technique for computing the projection down in one dimension. But since you're looking at pairwise combinations, that could lead to a little bit of growth of number of inequalities, and that is a computational challenge with the Fourier method. Similarly, for solving problems in uh, propositional logic, Boolean logic, you had resolution methods, which again essentially would eliminate variables from clauses by taking a clause with a positive x1 and one with a negative negation, and then computing the resolvent, right? So finally, even with systems of Diophantine Diophantine systems of solving over the integers, you could do something like elimination, compute various matrix GCD computations that give you the Hermite normal form, a triangulation, or a Smith normal form, which is a diagonalization, using unimodular operations, which is essentially matrix GCD computations. So underlying a lot of the mathematical problems of solving these systems were just these simple elimination ideas, some of them more efficient than others. And in fact, the Farkas lemma that was mentioned up in this previous slide leads us to a very simple realization that linear programming is in NP intersect co-NP. And so Jack Edmonds, the guru from Waterloo, basically said if you're in NP intersect co-NP, then it's most likely uh, there is also a polynomial time algorithm. And so this, he said, in his usual flowery way, he would say that if there is a good characterization, there has to be a good algorithm. So a lot of people were then hunting for a good algorithm for linear programming. And of course, as PhD students, we watched as Khachiyan in the Soviet Union, and then later Narendra Karmakar at Bell Labs, published the new polynomial time algorithms um, for linear programming. So very exciting times as PhD students to see all this happening. I decided to focus more on the combinatorial and discrete aspects of solving integer linear programming problems, which essentially, trained me in discrete optimization. And people like Ravi Kannan, who had solved the Smith normal form for integer matrices, Jerry Shapiro and Ralph Gomery, who had pioneered in the group knapsack problems and group theoretic approaches, and Tom McDanty, who was a graph algorithms and Matroid algorithms guy. So basically these were my PhD advisors, and so one got the PhD done. And then I moved to Purdue as a young professor, had an extraordinary sort of mentor at Purdue, Sriram Abhyankar, who is a very powerful algebraic geometer and who started teaching a bunch of us algebraic geometry. And again, he was a big believer in this elimination methods, and so essentially he gave us a very algorithmic view of combining algebra and geometry to solve various problems in geometry. So with that kind of background, I jumped into essentially working in computational geometry or geometric reasoning, depending on how you looked at it. So my first PhD student was Debashish Datta, who then has gone on to be the Chancellor of Rutgers and is now Chancellor at the University of Michigan. Well, my master's student at that time was actually Ravi Venkatesan, who later became chairman of Microsoft. He actually worked in geometry and reasoning for robotics. But then I also realized that it was the early 80s and this whole area of rule-based reasoning and expert systems and so on. And there was a sort of first AI hype, so to speak, right? There was a lot of excitement about how rule-based reasoning and various good old-fashioned AI methodologies were going to meet the Turing test and, create artificial intelligence and so on. So a lot of us sort of jumped into this space of what you might call rule-based reasoning or deductive logic, computational logic to automate deductive reasoning. And of course, the main idea being used was that of Horn rules and chaining methods for reasoning. And Horn rules essentially meant that the disjunctions on the right, you'd have only one, at most one positive variable. I think that gives a certain syntactic structure to the axioms and the rule-based systems, which allows chaining to be a complete inference method. So, like any academic sort of jumped into all this, started looking at various special structures that could be of SAT, that could be speeded up, whether it was 2SAT or Horn, renamable Horn, generalized Horn, extended Horn, all kinds of uh, new polynomial classes where you could solve SAT in polynomial time. And this essentially led to a book that I wrote with John Hooker on automated theorem proving. And this was sort of the academic experience that I came back to ISC and Bangalore and came back to India to work here. First came on a sabbatical and then stayed on. So during the sabbatical, we started building systems, mostly for DRDO at the Center for AI and Robotics. Professor Vidyasagar was then leading CARE. And so we built, theorem provers. And I also built a compiler for Prolog with some students at ISC, and then we also, you know, got a parallel version, concurrent version working on Param, and so on, right? So, and then went into first order logics and various buildings, various theorem provers. And since I was sitting in computer science automation, there were a lot of very good students who could build these systems. So we had a lot of fun doing that. Meanwhile, I was also going back and forth to IBM at Watson and working with Jean-Louis Lasset and Sanjoy Mitter at MIT. And so we built a few things together there. Somewhere around the early 90s, I guess, we all started realizing that uh, these knowledge-based systems and automated theorem proving and so on would was analogous to thinking slow, but to think fast, you may want to uh, think of other ways of approaching pattern recognition. And so that led us to really think hard about neural networks. And a group of us actually built, I guess at that time, one of the world's largest um, optimally trained Hopfield net. This was, 900 by 900 Hopfield net with about 41,000, no, I guess 400,000 synaptic weights that needed to be optimized. And we had a, a nice theoretical result that the radius of direct attraction could be solved in polynomial time. And then we used that to train this network and demonstrate this. This at that point in 1995, I guess, was one of the largest networks that had been solved to optimality. And this could have been actually an interesting point at which India could have, and at IISc, we could have actually invested much more into neural networks and trying to optimize them. Obviously, computational power was one of the challenges. Even to do this problem, we needed about 16 days on a workstation to solve this problem. So this describes sort of my little academic journey with and I often refer to it as eating sauerkraut with chopsticks, because we were solving all kinds of symbolic problems, but using numerical methods, right? So this is kind of using tools from the right brain to solve problems of the left brain. So this was an interesting intellectual sort of journey. Um, um, by the time I get to the late 90s, I guess, this journey of eating sauerkraut with chopsticks, which actually can be ascribed to Leibniz. He saw the connection between the two. He called it, essentially that you could resolve philosophical debates just by computation, or universalis characteristica, which is symbolic reasoning, with calculus, ratio canautor, which is computation. So it actually has a very sound sort of philosophical foundation. But then we also came under the influence of another mentor, I think Professor Rodam Narasimha, who then was leading the National Institute of Advanced Studies, and pointed out that essentially what we were doing was mostly what he called computational positivism, which was sort of a classical Indian tradition in science that said observation and computation leads to knowledge, which is really can be thought of as the byline for AI, right? Data plus computation leading to new knowledge. But Professor Rodam Narasimha was also at the National Institute of Advanced Studies then. So in addition to tutoring us on these classical foundations of computational positivism, we were all also starting to think about how to make India Viksit, right? But we were doing it long before it sort of became fashionable to think about it or talk about it. But the big challenge, like I put in data from today, we are at 3.72 trillion is our national GDP, and our per capita GDP is around $2,660 approximately. And I've talked to various economists. I think, of course, we're all looking forward to, somehow getting to a much higher value, almost 8 to 10 times where we are by 2047, if we really want to get to get rich before we get old, right? And this is going to require something a little bit different from standard growth rates of 6 to 7%, right? And this is sort of our last window because the demographic dividend, I think, will sort of give out by 2047. So we really need to get there, at all costs, right? If we want to solve various problems of development. So that did seem that in some ways we needed to think about how to translate our investments in deep research, technology, and capabilities, and actually create financial value out of it. Some of these ideas of how higher education contributes to economic growth, I think it it made sense to go and look at how the US had done this. Post World War II, of course, Vannevar Bush had written the famous paper on Science, the Endless Frontier. And of course, he set up NSF. I mean, that's what led to the creation of NSF. And but Bush had a certain bias, which was that applied research will drive out the pure. So sort of, in some sense, give more patronage to theoretical work because foundational work, fundamental work, and that should help the nation grow. And but by about 1980s, I think the US realized that the system was supporting mediocre basic research, and it needed a rethink. I mean, one of the refreshing things about the US is that they're willing to rethink, right, and change course whenever there is clear understanding that something is not working. So this is what happens, and so there's a brand new idea. The brand new idea, and is called Pasteur's quadrant. So if you just kept looking at utility and building polytechnics and pushing people into utility, then you would go to Edison's corner, right? If you were pushing knowledge for knowledge's sake and only foundational work, then you would end up in Niels Bohr's corner, right? But really what you wanted to be is a Pasteur's quadrant because that is utility-inspired basic research. Pasteur sort of being symbolic of that. And the question was, how do you get there, right? And so anyway, I think the whole shift in funding policy, and so on, pushes the whole U.S. system into Pasteur's quadrant. And I think for many of us who were academics there, we saw that happening, right? Engineering research centers, university research initiatives, you'd get multi-million-dollar grants, but as long as you were working on something that actually was utility inspired, but they were allowing you to also do basic research within that framework. So that was I actually lived through some of that in the US, and then I guess now I guess the theme that's running in the West, and which we might want to think of seriously, is how there's been such exponential growth in various technologies and capabilities and engineering, new materials and so on, that can't we actually put things together very rapidly to actually create new value. And so this is, the economists call it recombinant growth theory. And, this could be thought of as a driver of innovation. So I just give you that background to say that around the late 90s, this group of four of us, and you probably recognize the faces there. There's Vinay Vishwanath on the left, Swami Manohar next to him. I'm on the other side of the pillar, and Ramesh Hariharan is the fourth, the youngest, the baby of the group. And the four of us are running this lab called Perceptual Computing Lab at ISC, and we get the feeling that it's time to think about strong translation and doing something about uh, leveraging our technology capabilities. And we start building the Simputer. And, while we are doing that, Mr. Ratan Tata comes as the president of the court and basically asks the question, why are there no startups out of ISC? And so that night, Manohar shoots off a letter to the director and says, our lab is ready to start two companies. How should we go about it? And I think there's not any process in place. So the director very uh, candidly tells us that's actually at that time Professor Govardhan Mehta. He says, well, we don't have a process, but I'll appoint a committee. And fortunately for us, he was open-minded. I think the chairman of the council, Raja Ramanna, was also open-minded. And Professor Kincha, who was heading our Society for Innovation and Development, was not only open-minded, but actually a great supporter. And so the timing was great. I think we were the first, I guess, sanctioned faculty entrepreneurship in the country. I think with ISC as a co-promoter, I think so ISC held a little under 10% equity in our companies. And we started a company to commercialize the Simputer called Pico Peta Simputers. And we also started Strand. So actually, these were started concurrently as companies, although the background work on Simputer had preceded by a couple of years. So we are in year 2000, and these two companies launch by 2001. The Simputer, of course, all of you know the story. It was something built out of crazy hippie energy. I think we were just, determined to build uh, out of the box, right? So it was a handheld computer, the first handheld really running the full Linux kernel. We had micro X windows for the graphical part. Manohar had programmed up all kinds of vector graphics based um, visualization capabilities. The box was a 7-layer motherboard, which we had designed, along with some hardware engineers from industry in Bangalore. And the entire user interface, multilingual, and so on, was greatly innovative for those days, right? And it could speak in Indian languages. There was a text-to-speech Squawk box and that Ramesh wrote, and we got a lot of attention, but didn't actually, so including political attention, but didn't really get the financial push that I think we were probably ahead of the time. And certainly the investment sector, the investor community was not ready to believe that an innovation out of India could be so far ahead of the curve, right? But technically, we would have been filing, I mean, we'd essentially have been about 4 years ahead of the first smartphones if we had got the right level of support at that point. Got many awards, but not we didn't really achieve the translation that we were hoping. Although I think it introduced the meme of handheld computing and mobile applications. So when I think smartphones and so on actually became available, there was already in some sense a preparedness that we could get into all kinds of applications. Strand, on the other hand, was was funded well. I think we got early Series A funding from Westbridge Capital Partners, from UTI Venture Fund, by a Japanese group that was looking for bioinformatics tools that they could sell and distribute in Japan. And Strand was actually building all of those tools. Not many people realize that Strand was actually the first AI company in India, right? Because essentially we were applying all the tools in AI that all the thinking fast, thinking slow tools that we had been working on and applied it to biology. And we actually created some of the early analytic tools for the life sciences, which, while the physical sciences had MATLAB and chemistry and materials had Accelerus and Tripos, there was nothing really for the research biologists, and particularly the people in genomics and so on, so proteomics. And so we built those tools. And basically, we built a successful software company that was providing all these tools to the instrument companies like Agilent and Illumina and others to bundle with their instruments and sell. We had to give up some branding because they wanted to rebrand and sell it, but we do know that we had impact. I mean, there was probably the gold standard tools, GeneSpring, Mass Profiler Pro, and so on, which were all built at Strand and maintained at Strand, and even to this day are. And with a large impact on research biology, particularly in the first decade of the millennium, when the human genome annotation was being worked out and a lot of high throughput experiments were moving forward. So Strand starts out as a bioinformatics company. By about 2012, we realized that instrumentation and actually building a lab and being able to sequence and so on is becoming feasible. So we bite the bullet, raise another round of funding of 10 million, 12 million, and actually start building out the labs to do the actual wet lab work. And so we under one roof, we have both the informatics stack and the labs. And by about 2015, 16, we're actually we're able to provide clinical solutions to the Indian medical system and, all the precision medicine solutions. And we introduced sort of clinical genomics to the country for the first time. It takes 4 or 5 years really to sort of convince the medical community that this new way of approaching disease markers and diagnostics is actually useful. And by about 2021, you start seeing the scaling of genomics. Sorry, I'm taking a little long. I'll try to wind up quickly. this leads us to start building various, affordable tests for the Indian market. We're also being helped by the fact that the cost of genome sequencing is rapidly coming down. So now for about 15,000 rupees, you can get your whole exome sequenced, have a counseling session, and you can also, uh, you know, have early detection of cancer tests with just a blood draw. All of this has now come into the market. Around this time, of course, when we're ready to scale, uh, Reliance, Mr. Mukesh Ambani basically feels that it's time to democratize genomics and finds a strand as a good vehicle to do that, to fulfill his vision. So he acquires Strand, about 80% of Strand at that point. He actually buys out all the shareholders who are not actually working for the company, and then Strand becomes part of the Reliance Group. Uh, it's I call this the promise fulfilled, because the day it's announced that Strand has been acquired by Reliance, the shares of Reliance go up some 3 point some percent, 3.8% or something like that. And that translates to an impact of $8.1 billion on the market cap of Reliance. And so uh, I keep telling the ISC administration that ISC has actually created a deep tech unicorn towards Viksit Bharat, but ISC is a little shy about taking this type of credit. So, but I thought it's important to put this out there, because I do think this is how we are going to reach that challenge that I talked about earlier, right? Just want to mention that, after having fulfilled that promise, I felt I could fool around a little. So I've been building two more companies. One is called Yantri Labs, where we're actually building a kind of a foundation model on order books in the National Stock Exchange. And we're actually trying to create an AI that could give signal on short-term trading. So it's an algorithmic trading engine that we're building. It's right now in validation runs, so you may hear about it soon, right? So it's interesting. It's a little bit like the DeepSeek story. It's actually an AI built in for the trading community. I also wanted to experiment a little with genome writing. Strand is basically a genome reading company. So genome writing, of course, meant we would get into synthetic biology, and CRISPR is the obvious tool that you want to use there. And around this time, I was, along with PJN and others during the pandemic, we were doing a lot of work on biosecurity, surveillance, One Health, and so on. Um, so CRISPR is sort of CRISPR Bets is inspired by some of these concerns on biosecurity and surveillance. So what we are actually attempting to do, and this patent has been filed, is actually build a microfluidic chip with this, which is also electronic. So we call it electrowetting, and this will run multiplexed CRISPR assays in the microfluidic channels, and be able to test in the field. Think about the COVID self-tests or the pregnancy kits and so on that you get, except now we're actually be able to use CRISPR for nucleic testing, which is confirmatory. So this is a sort of an exciting future that we're working on. So This is sort of my disclaimer slide, but it's also, in some sense, the fun that one has once you've fulfilled your promises. You're basically investing in various startups, just mentoring them, having fun. So I'll stop there. Happy to take questions.